Hey folks, we're live here with Effective Remote Work. My name is Justin. Thanks for tuning in. Today what we're going to do is I'm just going to spend a little bit of time inside of Obsidian and inside of some productivity tools, just trying to hash out a workflow. One of the things that's been throwing me off over the last couple of weeks has been the fact that I've had some challenges with my overall workflow. Over the summer, I switched to a more multi-operating system environment. I was using Mac OS primarily previously, and now I'm using a combination of Mac OS and Linux and iOS, iPad OS, so on and so forth. And basically what I've found is that I've had to completely reshake up all of my workflows and needed to sort things out. What I'm trying to do today is just kind of bring it all together and get a plan together of how I'm going to move those forward. And so feel free to watch along and ask any questions that you have as we go here. But the whole idea of this is just to kind of in public walk through my productivity system and the ideas that I'm working through and what I'm trying to bring everything to, I guess, when it comes down to it. A little bit of history to start off with, though, is that first I got into productivity, well, probably 10 years ago or more now, and I first started off just using anything I could. I didn't really have a need to get into it, but I thought getting things done was pretty neat, and I thought the ideas were pretty great. Got really introduced to productivity through like the Mac Power Users podcast way back when, almost when they first started. And then I just, as life and everything went on, I got further into it. I was, into the working world and needed more productivity types tools. And so I started experimenting around, and long term, I ended up landing on OmniFocus. But since I just mentioned that I'm not really on Mac 100% of the time, it's a little difficult for me to use OmniFocus as my main tool. Plus, I was just finding that with some of the ways that I was using it in the past, that it would just get a little overwhelming for me. And so today I want to walk through a little bit of my thought processes in that. So I'm going to switch over to screen share here. Okay. So now you should be able to see Obsidian on my screen. And what I've been doing here is just kind of doing some basic mapping of thought processes. I've got a bunch of papers on my desk here from what I've been doing over the last few days and just thinking through the ideas that I have. And it's just a number of random things. There's lots of different aspects that I want to think through and different components to the system that I want to get nailed down. Basically, as you can see on the screen here, I've got this diagram of inflow, triage, and then integration. What I'm looking at doing with that in a productivity sense is inflow is basically anything that would be considered an inbox in a getting things done sense. This is an email inbox. These are chat softwares that I use. Discourse forums that I'm a part of, text messages, any places where outside stuff can accumulate. It can also be a box like on Raindrop.io where I am collecting articles that I want to take a look at a later point in time. And basically, it's just all my collection points. Then, one thing that's been missing. Oh, hey, JF. Thanks for joining this stream here. Glad to have you on as here. Feel free to ask any questions that you have. Thanks everybody else for joining, and be sure to ask your questions in the chat too. But anyway, on the diagram here, so the inflow is all the inboxes type stuff. This is where I need to go get stuff or where things accumulate. The step that's been missing for me in some regards is this triage step. I would always treat my inboxes and this triage together as kind of the same thing. And the way that I think about triage is it's like where I've already cut the cruft out or the stuff I don't need to deal with or that's not important to me. Then triage is the place where I need to deal with all of the stuff that I've determined is important to me. Welcome, Walter from Germany. Thanks for joining the stream too. And so this is going to be really, like I mentioned at the beginning of the stream, this is going to be really informal. It's just me kind of talking through ideas here to get it taken care of. Just try to figure out my own productivity system and thoughts because I'm constantly iterating on this stuff. So triage is all the stuff that I am holding for processing. It's the stuff where I need to clarify it a little bit more if you're thinking getting things done terminology. And then integration, that step is more, this is where it ends up in my system. And so I've got these different buckets here that I am considering the spokes of my system, so to say. Got people from all over the globe here too, which is really cool. We got Tansy from Australia. We've got someone from Ukraine, England. Really, really glad to have you all here today. I love the fact that I can chat with all of you all over the world from my little room here, my little house in northern Minnesota in the United States. That's super fun. So thanks for joining. So anyway, in the integration step, I'm looking at integrating the information that I've triaged and processed into my system. And I've got these 3 different areas here. So my daily planning, kind of the way that I've been doing that, and it's worked really well for me, is I'm using the bullet journal. And how I'm doing that, I don't use the bullet journal in a full traditional sense. If you're familiar with that, I definitely recommend checking out the bullet journal website and Ryder Carroll's method. If you haven't read the bullet journal method book, if you're interested in the bullet journal, highly recommend it. It's a really, really great overview on the system and how it's put together and why it's put together the way it's put together. But what I'm using from the bullet journal is the rapid logging, the daily logging technique. It's what I found to be the most effective for me. It's really easy to just write down events that have happened or ideas, tasks that I want to take a look at some point. And then my plan is to, on a daily basis or a regular basis, look over those tasks and make sure that they end up in my current actions bucket so that I have a place to maintain the big picture. Welcome from Peru. That's really cool to have people from South America here as well. So anyway, my bullet journal is kind of my daily workspace. I guess you could think of it in that way. Long-term planning is something that I've been getting into over the last couple of years. I don't do goals too much. I tend to rest more on the side of the theme system, like from CGP Grey on the Cortex podcast. I don't do it like super in depth like they do, but I tend to have a theme or a word that tends to guide a lot of the decisions that I'm making in my year. And I've been planning this in Notion previously, but and I've tried this in the bullet journal. And I'm just trying to, my main focus here is because I'm using Obsidian so much, I'm trying to narrow down the number of tools that I'm using so that I'm not in a million different places, because the more tools that I have, the more inboxes that I have to check, so on and so forth. So I'm going to begin trying to figure out the structure, if I get time to today, in Obsidian, how to do my long-term planning, but that's where I'm planning on landing that. So basically the way that I do long-term planning is I'll set my yearly word or theme. And then from there, each season, or about roughly a quarter, I'll just take a look at that theme, try to figure out like, hey, are there things that I want to do in the next few months that are kind of the best things for me to do that, I can aim at for that time period to kind of advance that theme in my life. But the big deal with the theme is it's more of a guiding principle for making decisions in that time. So this year, my theme has been the Year of Stabilization, which is really quite ironic considering the fact that the year has been a complete year of destabilization for a lot of people. But the thing for me is that it's been more of a focus on like stabilizing things in my life, stabilizing my workflows, stabilizing things with my family, because we've had kids a lot in the last few years and we have 3 kids now. And so we're trying to figure out how do we do life as a family together and all of that. So, and then next year I'm really looking at it being the year of like slowing down. Something that I've wanted to do is just to slow down and be more deliberate about the things that I'm doing. Because I have a tendency to rush, I'll be honest about that. And I have a tendency to not be as patient. So that's kind of the big deal there. And then those words will influence the plans and the thoughts that I have for the different seasons or quarters that I'm moving through in my life. Current actions. What I'm going to look at for that is I've been experimenting using Todoist. And frankly, I've been really enjoying the boards feature there. That's really really something that I've been enjoying. I've used Todoist in the past, and I just didn't like just being stuck in an outline view, and so that's why I've been experimenting with things like Notion. But I do like the task first modality that Todoist has. A couple chat messages here. Everywhere, if that's how you say your username. I use the bullet journal in a traditional way for rapid logging and Obsidian for long form journaling. That's very similar to how I do things too. I tend to capture thoughts and ideas or quick happenings on paper. For one, I really like paper because I don't have to think about it being there. On my shelf back over here, I've got probably 10 or 15 notebooks that I've accumulated over the last 10 years or so. And I can go through them at any time. I don't have to worry about backing them up. I just make sure that they're there. And, they're obviously at risk for physical damage if something happens like flooding or fires and stuff like that. But I don't have to think about backing them up. And then years down the road too, if like my kids inherit them or something like that, they can look through and see what I was thinking at different points of life. So I really like paper for that. But I do agree that using a tool like Obsidian is really great for building out bigger thoughts, longer term thoughts, or more complex thoughts than paper because it's easier to come back to it, edit it, add to it, and so on. Hope Street says the devs are implementing toggles in preview mode at the moment. For indents, that should be the end of the year in the what you see is what you get editor. Yeah, I think that is definitely going to be happening. It'll be interesting to see where Obsidian goes with the Typora style editor that they're looking at adding. I think that will be a fantastic addition. I think the other thing too they're looking at with folding inside of Obsidian is to be able to retain memory of those folds, so you don't have to click those folds closed every time you go into a document. Tansy mentions that I do my own form of journaling in Notion and have a lot in there. More than likely, I may have my knowledge thoughts system. Yeah, Notion's an awesome tool for a lot of that stuff, and a lot of people, it just jives really well for them. I've been enjoying more focused tools. I was on the Notion train for a while, and I still like it. It's a great piece of software. But more focused tools for me that are tailored to a specific use versus trying to be more catch-all cases. It just works better with the way my brain works. So yeah, hybrid approach. Yes, that's definitely my mode of thought. I've been experimenting with different ways to do it for a number of years now. Trying to figure out, do I manage all of my tasks in the bullet journal and try to augment that with digital tools in some way, or do I try to have a main task database and then do more daily planning? And I've been finding that a lot of the day-to-day stuff, such as rapid logging, works really well in the bullet journal, but anytime that I need to keep something that I need to restructure or organize or remind myself of, works really well in digital. So that's why I'm more resting on the Todoist application for my main task database. So, and then obviously, if you follow this channel at all, I'm going to turn on Do Not Disturb quick. All of my notes and thoughts end up in Obsidian. There are a few other buckets too that I am working on. I've got references or notes, and that is going to end up in Dropbox. It's just where I keep my files. And then I've got a number of different inboxes that will be going through as well. So I'll just put a little heading here for us so we can see this a little easier. These are all the tools that are going to be quote unquote in the system. I'll also add Raindrop here. And then Kindle, because I do a lot of book reading on Kindle. I wasn't a Kindle fan for a long time because I didn't like highlighting and stuff like that in there. I found it difficult to retain context. But then, as I've talked about a lot on the channel recently, something that has been helpful for me has been writing down my own thoughts instead of highlighting inside of Kindle books. And I know there's services like Readwise that can extract Kindle highlights and things like that, but I'm not super interested in going that route because my main focus for reading books is to learn from them and to synthesize my own thoughts. And so that's why I'm using, I'm writing my own thoughts and taking notes on books as I'm reading. So previously, I wasn't a big fan of reading on Kindle. I prefer paperback books more. But Kindle, actually, with their latest iteration of the Paperwhite, it's actually really good. Like, it's really clear, and I love the backlighting on it. I can't really get over that. I had a Kindle that was 10 years old previously, and I didn't like it all that much. But the Kindle Paperwhite that's out now is actually pretty decent. So that's really the system that I'm building here. I've got my daily planning that's happening in the bullet journal. My long-term planning will happen in Obsidian. It's currently happening in Notion right now, or not really happening because I haven't been using it as much. Current actions in a master task database in Todoist. All my notes and thoughts in Obsidian. Reference documents and notes will end up in Dropbox. I currently don't use any sort of a reference software such as Zotero or anything. I'm not reading scholarly articles at this point. So Dropbox alone is simple for that. And then Raindrop and Kindle for my online article and my book reading. So over here, we got Yakov. He's saying, why Obsidian versus DevonThink? Well, one, I haven't really been a huge fan of DevonThink just in general. I've tried it in the past. I haven't tried DevonThink 3, but it's a slower pace of development. It's really super powerful piece of software. But I just like Obsidian in the way that it works and how I can link things together and all of that. So that's kind of why. But if you like Obsidian and you like DevonThink, you can use them both together. You can index your Obsidian vault inside of DevonThink if you would like to have both there. That's the beauty of having this just being an interface for files on your file system and not being stuck in a database. I agree that the bullet journal is great for rapid logging, but recently I started to try long-form journaling in Obsidian, and I find it very useful to find patterns and thoughts. I agree there. Especially when you're regularly linking topics and thoughts together, it's very easy to start to see connections that you didn't necessarily see before. But more importantly, I think it's just important to see topics that come up over and over and over again. If you're constantly thinking about productivity, if you're constantly thinking about remote work like I do, you'll start to see those journaling entries start to reflect those. And then you can start to build off of the similar entries and to build them into more permanent notes and things like that. Simon says, will my bullet journal be in Rome or Obsidian? I confess to being a Roman. Honestly, my bullet journal will be in my bullet journal and on a paper notebook. I don't do too much digital bullet journaling. I like to have analog in my life to some capacity just because it helps me disconnect from the screens. It helps me process out my thoughts. Like you can see here, all the stuff that I've got on the screen here, it basically started from a piece of paper and I've got like 8 pieces of paper here that I just kind of ripped out of a legal pad and started writing notes on. It's a really great way for me to help at least process out information, get things out of my head. If I try to do that digitally, I honestly have found myself to get lost in it. Digital is really great for me to help synthesize information and integrate it into a broader context and system. But for the day-to-day stuff, I much prefer paper for that. But if Rome's working for anybody for doing that, Obsidian can work for that too. That's awesome. There's lots of great tools out there, whether analog or digital, that will work well for a bullet journal style of working. Okay, so next on the list here, I'm just going to make a quick list of inboxes for myself. Some of this I'll come back and I'm going to split into separate notes so that I can keep them up to date versus just in this October 2020 workflow note. But I've got a number of inboxes here on paper that I just want to get into my system so I can see. So forums I'm a part of. I've got YouTube because I want to make sure that I'm keeping in contact with all of you and the comments that you're leaving. Email, which has become quite a big one, actually. It's actually surprisingly difficult to find a great email client, and especially one that you can work really well with across platforms. Linux, there's not a lot of great email clients out there, so I've been doing a lot of my email processing on iOS and iPadOS, and I actually really like Spark for that. And Spark also integrates with Todoist, so that'll be nice as well if I need to capture tasks from my task log. Well, let's go Todoist, daily log from my bullet journal, Obsidian daily notes. Surprising fact is that as time has gone on, I have actually not used the daily notes in Obsidian as much as I thought I was going to be. I don't usually type in Obsidian every single day. And as a result, I'm not really using the daily notes as much, but I'm capturing that stuff on paper, so it's still in a system somewhere. So it's not just floating out in my brain somewhere and just not getting captured, though sometimes that does happen. But that was just an interesting observation that I made. Browser tabs. How many of you are guilty of having like 800 browser tabs open? I've thankfully tried to mitigate this as much as I can for myself, but it's a problem I think a lot of people have. Discord, because I hang around in the Obsidian Discord chat, random sites that I like to check on. Drafts, which is an app that I like to use to capture text on my iPhone. Chat, and then papers and mail that I get. These are all the different inboxes that are more inflows. And then, so that's kind of what I'm thinking in that regard. So we've got almost all the same workflow. I've been trying NotePlan 3 as my digital daily planner. Have you looked at it yet? It's a great question, Gary. I actually did just take a look at NotePlan this week in beta, just on my iPhone. I didn't load it up on my Mac or on my iPad yet. And it looks like a really powerful piece of software. I like the fact that you can sync it with Dropbox or iCloud or through CloudKit to kind of have that happen just magically behind the scenes. I like the fact that it's plain text based. You can load up your Markdown files that you want, and you can even open that folder in Obsidian if you'd like to manage your tasks that way. Honestly, I haven't played around with it long enough to really figure out a workflow. I'll be honest, I was getting a little bit, I was just having a hard time figuring out how I would use it when I was playing around with it. It seemed a little bit discombobulated for me. Not that the software is bad by any means. It was just that I was having a hard time figuring it out for myself. But I've heard lots of really good things about it, and I like the fact that it's based on plain text on the back end. That's a pretty cool thing. Okay, so we've got these inflows documented here. Then I want to just kind of break down some triage. So for tasks, so these inflows again are the places where stuff that I might need to deal with or think about or handle in some way tends to accumulate or come at me. And so these are things that I just need to be consciously aware of, that I might have information coming at me from them. Note that I don't have Twitter or Facebook on here because I don't do too much on social media these days. But so then the next step from the inflow, as I've grabbed them, cut the cruft off that I'm not going to use, then I go into the triage step, which is what I more consider like the clarify step in getting things done. And so this is where the triage items will congregate. So tasks will congregate in Todoist and my daily log, and sometimes drafts if I'm out and about and I don't capture it in Todoist, but I need to make a better habit of doing that. Ideas and notes. These will end up in an Obsidian inbox folder or daily log. Read later or process will be Raindrop. Then events clearly will be on calendar. Someday, maybe, or plans will be in Obsidian. Come back and highlight those in a second. Files, Dropbox, and then paper items will be on my inbox tray. Yes, I still have one of those hanging around Gary, I'm glad you're enjoying the video. Feel free to ask any more questions that you have. This is kind of just a chill time where we're just hanging out here and I'm working on a couple of things. And you guys can ask questions about what I'm doing and all of that stuff. And so, okay, I've got kind of a higher level structure that I'm going to lay out to for the system. So first and foremost is like the visionary layer. It's kind of 3 layers. There's visionary, strategic, and tactical. So visionary is what I would consider like my theme for the year. It would also be things that I would, dream of doing at some point in the future, whether that's, launching a specific product for effective remote work or building a specific integration for discourse as part of my day job. Just kind of, these are the high level aims. I would never consider these goals. They're like ideas that I have. As I mentioned earlier in the live stream, I don't really do goals. I have a difficult time with doing goals, to be honest with you. It is every single time I set a goal, I end up having to change it every 2 weeks later. There's usually some life circumstance that happens. There's usually something that changes in the work that I'm doing where that thing that I thought was going to be important for me to focus on for the next few weeks or months is no longer important at all. And so that's why I rest more on themes and then try to choose aims for the seasons or the quarter that I'm currently in. But I'm not super intentional about pursuing things. I'm more wanting to be where I'm at right now and build from there than to try to achieve something that's way off far out in the future that I don't even necessarily know if I want to go there. Now, obviously, there's places and times where I am pursuing things like that, but it's more from a, hey, things seem to be lining up to do this one thing, like the Obsidian Made Simple course. I had been thinking and planning on trying to do that for quite a while, but then Francesco D'Alessio reached out to me and he said, hey, you want to do a course on this together? I think it'd be a really fun thing. And I said, sure. So then it just kind of lined up to be something that was a good thing to do at that time. So visionary is my theme. This is my, kind of someday items, maybe items. And then these will be in Obsidian. Then strategic, these would be more of the aims and things that are big picture things to focus on over a longer period of time. Again, not goals, but if there's something that's on my plate over the course of a year or less, these are things that I need to keep track of in some way, shape, or form to make sure that I'm advancing them, especially if they're relating to my day job. And so these are more aims or projects that I'm working on. And these I'm planning on tracking in Todoist. If I can type Todoist today. And then tactical, that level is really the day-to-day stuff that I'm doing. And it's really not much more complicated than that. This is the take the trash out every single week. This is the I need to post an update about something, reach out to a person. And so these I can track a little bit separately. And then these will be in both Todoist and my bullet journal. This is kind of the broad structure that I'm looking at setting up. Now, anytime you have a productivity system, you do need to have a workflow. So do I see a Telegram application icon on the left-hand side? It is very similar to Telegram, but what this is actually Obsidian Publish. It's a service that you can pay for from the Obsidian developers where you can publish some or all of your Obsidian Vault to the web. I'm making some updates to mine, and I'll be sure to share that out at some point in the future so you can kind of get a taste of mine, because there's a number of things in here that I do want to share and a number that I don't. So I'm trying to figure out the good balance of what's what's appropriate to share and what's not. So I'm gonna make sure to update that in the future so that you all can take a look at that. If you're looking at a way to share like a digital garden or notes that you're taking very quickly and easily, that's definitely a good way to go about doing that. So, but back to the question at hand that I was just thinking about here is that anytime you have a productivity system, you can't just leave it to its own devices. I think that's one of the things that a lot of people get trapped up on with Obsidian or with productivity systems in general, is that they kind of Ron Popeil it, where you set it and forget it. If you remember that infomercial from ages ago, if you don't, look it up. It's pretty interesting. But it's not something you can just set it and forget. You have to spend some intentional time curating what's in your system. That's why it's a good idea to put things in your system that you're committed to or that are important to you versus the stuff that just kind of fly by night. It's important because then if you're just putting everything into the system, then it's all the more difficult to process through that at a later point in time. It increases the overhead that you have to manage in the system. So if you can deal with that somehow up front, such as with having a triage process, that dramatically helps with being able to manage your system as you go. And so there's workflows and reviews that I know I need to have to maintain my system, and not only maintain my system, but maintain myself. And so these would include, I need time regularly to review all inboxes. I need time to process all triage locations. So that would be these here. Some of these inboxes need to get processed less frequently than others. Forums that I'm a part of, because they're part of my work, need to get processed more frequently. YouTube comments need to get processed on a less frequent basis. Email needs to get processed about once a day. With my current job and situation, that's not always the case for everyone. Same thing with my daily log, needs to get processed daily or every couple of days. But then things like Discord or mail and things like that, random sites, they don't need to get processed nearly as often. And that's one of the things that I've gotten caught up in the past, is that I end up prioritizing capturing and processing from these places a lot more over than triaging and processing and clarifying things. And so I end up getting kind of out of balance with my system. And so I need to make sure that I am properly on a proper schedule, processing and reviewing all those inboxes and making a higher emphasis on processing those triage locations, processing my Todoist inbox, my Obsidian inbox, because those are the things that actually have value to me versus the stuff that's just coming in from outside and everywhere. A couple questions in the chat here. I use DevonThink for my documents. You can grab the link from a DevonThink document, use that within Obsidian. Nice thing is you can move the document within DevonThink and the link address stays the same. DevonThink store and Obsidian utilize. That's an excellent tip, Walter. I think, honestly, that's really the beauty of using Obsidian. And then DevonThink is a super powerful piece of software too, is that you can do stuff like that. If you like having the power of DevonThink to index your files, it's hands down, you can't beat it. It's probably the best in class of what it does. Another workflow that I need is to think high level and creatively. And this is on a weekly, quarterly, and annual basis. What I'm basically doing here is that there's kind of two modes that you can work. There's the get your hands dirty, do stuff all the time, be in the thick of it, and just checking stuff off, which is the default mode that a lot of us have. I know that's me by default too. But you also need to be able to back up and look at things from a higher level or a strategic level, a visionary level. And so I need to make sure that I'm taking time on a weekly basis, on a quarterly basis, and an annual basis to do that backup. Weekly, I'm not going to get nearly as high level as quarterly, and then quarterly, I'm not going to get as high level as annually, because I do an annual review that is very, very high level and very creatively focused. Whereas quarterly, it's more planning, and weekly is more how did things go this week? Is there anything that I need to fix? Anything I need to change? And so on. Another thing that I need to do is make sure that I'm having fun and integrating leisure. This is something as a result of the pandemic that I've realized has been lacking in my life, and I'm trying to find different ways to have leisure. I'm reading a great book right now called Time Off that was recommended to me. And it's interesting to see how we tend to think leisure and relaxation, at least in America, are the same thing. Where if I, can have something to drink and have a snack and watch a TV show, we consider that like relaxation and leisure. But in reality, leisure is much more hands-on and involved. It's something that you're doing for the sake of enjoying it because you're passionate about it. And that's something that I find with music. I love to make music and write songs and so on and so forth. And so I've been trying to be more intentional about doing that, especially when I'm feeling a little drugged down by the current situation. So I need to be a little bit intentional to do that to keep all of this up to date. Because especially if I'm drugged down, my system's going to get drugged down, my work is going to get drugged down. So I've got to take care of myself too. And then another thing I need to do on a daily basis is plan the day's focus. This is something that I have wrestled with how to do on a number of occasions. There are different ways to do this. A lot of people recommend doing something like time boxing or time blocking, which is, I've been trying that off and on. And some days that works really well for me, and some days it's an absolute and utter disaster. The most important thing that I found for me to do is to plan my focus for the day. This is the top 1 to 3 things that I'm going to focus on. And then I have kind of an anchor point for that day to say, did I get that thing done? And if I did, I can consider that a successful day. And if I didn't, then I need to look at that and say, what happened? Why did that happen? More often than not, just something more important and urgent came up. And sometimes it's just because I was having a bad day. But if I can plan the day's focus, then I have a small but yet evaluatable benchmark for that day, as if it was a good day or not, if I was able to do that. Emil asks, what would you add as a feature from Notion or other apps to Obsidian? That is a really great question. I would have to say, if I were to pick one thing, it would maybe be something like the / command, where you can just type the / and then get access to different commands. It's not super critical for me to have that, though, because you've got Command P, which gives you this command palette menu. Here you have Command O, where you can look at different notes. It's quick switch there. There's lots of different ways to get around, and plus you already have the formatting that is inside of Markdown that you get from Markdown as well. So what book am I reading? Well, if you're talking about the time off one, I'll look it up here. Let's see. It is this one here. I've been really enjoying it. Well, let's see. It's not going to let me put it in the chat right now because apparently I'm not signed in through Streamlab OBS right now. What I will do is I will just pop open YouTube really quick and I'll add it to the chat. Sorry for the delay on that. Let's see here. Hopefully I won't totally kill my bandwidth now that I'm streaming what I'm also sending out. There it is. So should be in the chat now. LaTeX has /2, very convenient. That's pretty cool. Yeah, and John, I love the command palette as well. I think it's an incredibly, incredibly useful way to get around. I love it in code editors like VS Code, and I absolutely love just having it in Obsidian. It's just so flexible to be able to say, if I want to import a template, Command P template, and then I can add a different template into the note that I'm working on. Simon's asking, does Obsidian have its own flavor of Markdown like GitHub? I don't believe so. I think they have been extending some of it. So for example, with block references, if you didn't catch my video on that, you can create your own references or link to a reference. So say if I want to do 2020 October workflows, and then if I do the caret, you can see I have lots of different things here. And then if I do want to link to that graph, this is not standard Markdown, this hash and then the caret symbol. That's not going to render anywhere in any Markdown specification. If I recall correctly, I think they're using Common Mark, but I'm not entirely certain. But they are extending it in some ways. So it's all usual normal Markdown, but some of the extensions like the block referencing and the header referencing do not work for in other pieces of software at this point in time. If people choose to adopt those, that'd be really awesome. If not, Obsidian's still awesome and kicking right now, so I think we'll be fine. Okay, so I've got this kind of all spelled out here. This process of inflows, triage, and then some system structure and workflows. Kind of one of the things I think I want to do next is to play a little bit with some structure. I'm going to head over into Todoist. You can see here I've got a number of projects. I'll hype up the size, even though it totally broke the layout. Try refreshing. See if that helps. Well, it actually didn't do too bad. It looked just kind of funky up here. So kind of one thing that I'm thinking of doing here is right now I've got different projects for Discourse, Effective Remote Work, which I have a sub-project here for the next module for Obsidian Made Simple, and then my personal projects. What I want to do, though, is kind of change how I'm dealing with this a little bit. As I mentioned over here in Obsidian, I have kind of this system structure that I want to focus on, the visionary, strategic, and tactical. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a strategic project, and I'm going to make this yellow. For now, it's going to be a list. I do like the boards feature in the Todoist, and then I'm going to add that. This is going to be at the very top. So these are going to be all of these strategic big picture items that I want to at least keep track of for now. I'm not necessarily going to be working out of this project inside of Todoist, but it's going to be something I'm going to review on a regular basis to say, am I making progress on these things? Or to at least just remind myself that it's something that I need to keep top of mind. The other thing I'm going to do is going to create a tactical project. And I'm going to make that sky blue. And this is largely going to be just a bucket. Where this one, I might actually convert this to a board and add a couple sections in a minute. Just to kind of show myself status. But this is going to be more of a board with individual tasks and subtasks on it, potentially. Tactical is actually going to be where these projects are going to live. So it's just a slight different organization. No, I don't want that as a sub-project to Discourse. And then I will reorder these. So then I just kind of have some structure. It's kind of what I'm looking at doing here. Strategic stuff, I'm not going to add any of that in here on the live stream because there's some of that that's pretty sensitive. Gary's saying planning the days, focus, and time blocking is the reason I'm looking at the Note Plan 3 beta. Every day has its own Markdown file, and I find this great to filter the stuff that ends up in Obsidian. Yeah, I think that seems to be really interesting. It's very similar to the bullet journal style of you have your daily logs where you're noting things down, and then you do migrations on a monthly basis to where you either copy all that stuff into the next monthly log or you just kind of let it slide. I'm going to do something similar to that on a daily or on a weekly basis. My plan is that if there are tasks that are hanging around in my bullet journal that I have not yet completed, then they need to get migrated into Todoist to where they live. And then every day I'm going to be reviewing Todoist for today items that are due, and then any items that are important for me to take a look at. That's kind of the idea there. The other thing that I'm doing here too, inside of Raindrop, I'll pop this a little bigger here too so it's a little easier to see. I'm keeping this pretty simple so far, first and foremost, because I'm just starting off with it. But there are two collections that I have inside of Raindrop for bookmarks that I am keeping track of. First and foremost is the read later one. I don't know how many times that I find something that I want to read, but it's too long for me to read and consume right now, and I'm not really in a good mindset to think about it or take notes. And so I need a place to put those, which is here in this collection. And then the process triage. This is the items that I want to take something out of it and integrate it into my Obsidian vault. So for example, today at work, I was tracking down a bug in our software, and I used for the very first time the git bisect feature, which is really, really powerful. If you're not a developer, this might go straight over your head. Sorry about that. But basically what this does is you can take two different commits, one where a feature is working and one where it's not, and then git bisect will analyze those as you say, was this a good commit or not a good commit? And then it will say, hey, here's the commit where it was last working, or where it broke. And so I was able to locate the source of a bug in Discourse today by using git bisect. But I want to make sure that I integrate this into my Obsidian knowledge graph so that I can reference it and refer back to it at a later point in time. So that's kind of the idea there, is I've got this read later, and then a process triage, read later for actually reading things later, and then process triage so that I can come back and integrate it into my system. Then we head back into Obsidian. One of the things that I also need to do here is I need to start building out my planning workflow. Yeah, I used to use Notion for a web clipper as well, and I have a number of articles that are in there. What I was finding it was a little challenging for me for that was it being more in a database format. I do like the fact that it tends to clip the whole article. You get a lot of information with it. You can customize whatever flags you want to on it. But I was having a difficulty parsing through that information. It just wasn't quite jiving with the way that my brain works. I tend to be a little bit more of a files and folders, visual hierarchy organization type person versus a database linking type person, except in the case of Obsidian. For whatever reason, Obsidian works really, really well with the way my brain functions. And so that's why I've been using it. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pop open. Let's see. I'll do my productivity index here. Okay, so I need to figure out how I'm exactly going to map this stuff out. I got to figure out what to call it first. That's kind of the big deal. But I know what I need to do is kind of have a planning workspace. So maybe I'll just call it that. Let's call it a planning MOC. Okay, I'm just going to close that off now. Open these up a little bit. Okay, and I'll go links. Productivity. Just gives me a nice backlink to the other note so I can get there easily if I'm just hanging out in this note. So then what I need is, so I've got my visionary and then strategic. Again, I'm not doing any tactical stuff inside of Obsidian. I've considered having tasks and stuff in here individually, but I just wasn't happy with the different solutions that I was finding. So that's why I'm not doing that at this point in time. I know for sure I need to have a year yearly themes note, and then I also need to have someday maybe. That's probably going to freak out at me because, yep, it's got a slash in it. Create those because I do want those notes. And then strategic. If I need, I'm going to leave this blank for now, but this will be largely if I have projects that I need to take notes on. This is where those will end up. Another thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to add a tag to this. And what do I want to name that tag? I'll just name it planning. Because then I can come into all of these and I can go planning. Okay, so then what I'll do is I'll add links here. Planning MOC. And again, these are just links that I can use to easily get back and forth between these different notes if I need to. Okay, so yearly themes, I'm actually going to come back. I'm going to do current theme. I'm going to come back and I'm going to fill these out, but I'm going to do 2020 Year of Stabilization, and then current. Well, that's actually the current one. And then I'm going to put 2021 here. Year of slowing down, just because that's something that I want to be chewing on right now. What does that mean for me? Because it's kind of a transitionary season right now where I'm still working on some of the stabilization things that are in my mind. It's something that I'm still thinking about. And that actually might even continue into 2021 as well. But now, you know, I'm also thinking about what it means to slow down in lots of different ways. This has been kind of a theme that's come up over and over and over, and so I'm going to just latch onto it and see where it takes me. And then past themes, I'll get into those because I have to look at those up in Notion right now. And again, some of this stuff is sensitive, so I'm not going to get too deep into it on the live stream. A little bit more personal. But that's kind of the general concept there. And then someday maybe, let's see, I'm just going to copy this. Okay, I already did that apparently. And then this is just going to be the place where I'm going to list out stuff. I don't really have a big list of someday maybe items right now, but then I'll list them in here and then I will kind of organize them by different types of categories. And that's that. Okay, so if I head back to my 2020 workflows, I don't need that reference there anymore, so I'm going to delete it because that was just for testing. Okay. So as we've talked about in the stream, I'm really starting from the place of inflow, these inboxes, these outside sources of information that are coming at me. I'm cutting the cruft off there. I'm triaging that information in these tools. My bullet journal, Obsidian, Todoist, Dropbox, Raindrop, and my Kindle. And then they're getting integrated into those tools somewhere in the system that I have. So if it's in the bullet journal, that's largely for day-to-day planning, so there's not too much craziness there that I have to worry about. Obsidian, what we just built, the oh yes, Becca, I'm new to the productivity space. What does MOC mean in this context? It means map of content. Basically, it's just a shorthand form to say this is an index note that points to a specific kind of content in my Obsidian vault. The way I have mine structured is if I go to my index, I have an index note here, and there's these different indexes of places in my life that I find are important to have me writing notes. And then I have maps of content underneath of those that group different kinds of content together. So as I mentioned here in the planning map of content, this is all notes and links that are related to planning for myself. Hopefully that clarifies things for you. And if not, feel free to ask more questions. Okay, and then integrating into my system. Okay, so I think overall I have a good handle on where I kind of want to take things next. The next big step for me is to start the loading up process of these systems. What am I putting in here? I need to get everything out and then process through that and make sure that it gets to the proper locations in the system. And then I can start to build day-to-day, week-to-week, month-to-month workflows for managing that information. Now, we're getting pretty close to the end of the live stream here, so if you have any other questions or comments that you'd like to add, be sure to get those in the chat box. I would be happy to talk with those or through those with you while we're on the live stream. Otherwise, I am planning on doing these still on a semi-regular basis, usually on Friday afternoons for me. So be watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, feel free to subscribe if you found this helpful too. But yeah, this is generally just kind of the big picture overview of how I want the structure of my productivity system to look. That is really it. Now, some thoughts on this too, shortcomings potentially. First and foremost, I know that I have a tendency to make things way more complex than I need them to be. This, however, is a system that's built on lots and lots of iterations of trying different things, experimenting. If you're new to productivity or you've been around for a long time, I definitely recommend that if you haven't just experimented with things here and there, do it. Try something. Pick one thing in a week and say, does this actually work for me? Can I make this work for me? And if so, you can integrate it into your system. And if not, then you don't have to worry about it anymore. You can just stop doing it. I think one of the things that we productivity interested people get hung up on is that we have to have it all figured out up front. And this is something that I have been talking about a lot. I've got a podcast called Process at podcast.effectiveremotework.com. If you're interested in checking that one out. But the whole back catalog of that is really just talking through different productivity principles and ideas and thoughts and coming at it from a perspective of embracing process. Because learning all of this is not just get a bunch of knowledge and integrate it and do it. It's, and just doing the things that everybody says is the right thing to do. It's finding what works for you. And for me, this has been a lot of trial and error. And it has shifted and changed from season to season in my life. I went from being a broke college kid who was in computer science classes to a person who was early on in my career to being married and managing a couple of different areas of my life to now having kids and a development career and a side business that I'm doing this. And so there's lots of different pieces that I'm managing now. And I've had to kind of evaluate what's important to me in this system. And I've also had to figure out what works for me and not. I found that the bullet journal daily logging works really well for me, but the rest of it doesn't. I found that doing some kind of long-term planning in a more creative, flexible workspace is really important. I found that doing an annual review where I'm kind of just taking a survey of the last year and what I'd like the next year to look like, and doing that is really, really helpful for me. Bradley is asking, what is Raindrop? Raindrop is, it's similar to like Instapaper or Pocket, where you can clip articles there and then come back to them later. It's not exactly like those things. It's not really a read later service. It's more of a bookmarking spot where you can kind of jump into articles pretty easily. You can render previews here fairly easily in a reader mode, and so on and so forth. I just am experimenting with it. I've heard a lot of people talking about it and how nice it is to use for managing bookmarks and so on. And so I'm just checking it out. It's free. They have a paid tier. I'm using the free tier right now, just trying to figure out if it works for me, and we'll go from there. It's an experiment, but I've been liking it so far. Gary is saying, I admit to wanting everything up front too. Yeah, it's just, I think, human nature to want to get something before you actually get to it. It's challenging. It's hard to restrain ourselves, to not have it all figured out right away. But if we can start from a place of simplicity and just what we have now, and that's in your productivity system, but also in life, and then build from there, it's so much easier and so much less stressful, I have found, than trying to have it all figured out to build something that, you don't necessarily know if it's going to work for you or not, and then try to navigate all of that. It gets pretty messy. And Gary's also asking, how did I get on with getting things done? To be honest with you, I never fully incorporated all of the aspects of getting things done. I really like the process and the idea of it, where you capture and clarify, you organize it, you do it, you review it. I tend to stick to a lot of those same principles because they're really helpful. As far as getting down into you got to put everything in a task manager, and then you have project reference materials you need to keep in another system, and all of that stuff. I'm just trying to do what works for me more than anything. I always struggled with trying to break down projects into the smallest bite-sized chunks that you possibly could. That was kind of a challenge for me. Because whenever I break stuff down super, super small, I tend to get overwhelmed by it because I see all the little tiny things that I need to do, when in reality, all I need to see is probably the next one or two things that I need to do, which is probably more what getting things done is, oriented towards anyway, with the next actions concept. But so I guess I would say I still kind of adhere to some of the getting things done principles, but I'm not full in on it. I'm not super hardcore getting things done like some people are. And that's okay. Like, I don't need, I've gotten to the point where I don't need a handheld system, I guess, for myself that has stringent rules or ideas about how to handle productivity. I'm just trying to manage my life as it comes day to day. And this has really been the system that I have, and the ideas and the processes that I've learned have really helped me with that. Well, I hope you all found this live stream helpful today. If you didn't get a chance to watch all of it, or you want to come back and review it, this will be available video on demand on the channel. And as I mentioned, I will be doing more of these in the future. Be sure to subscribe if you found this helpful. And if not, I would love to hear from you too. If there's anything interesting that you were saying, I have some questions about that, definitely throw it in the comments below. I would love to hear feedback from you out there as well. But I'm going to sign off for the day. Hope you all have a fantastic weekend, and I will talk to you in the next weekend. Thanks for watching today.